All right, we've been talking about. I'm sorry. All right, that's that just does so much for me on so many different levels. Uh, the topic is real fruit, harvest time. Participating in things that are prepared for us. But we talked about the scripture says this that the harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. And so pray for laborers for the harvest. We were talking about that last week. And just talking about uh, how our life is set up. I didn't realize how much work this was going to be after they sang. But how how our life is set up where you should be like tree planted by the rivers of water, bringing forth fruit in your season, in Psalms 1. So I'm a tree. I'm planted by the rivers of water. I'm bringing forth fruit. So and we talked about how we're not supposed to be eating. We're not supposed to be eating our own fruit. So like, if you was an orange tree or apple tree, you don't see orange trees and apple trees eat their own apples and oranges. So everything in us is for others to partake of. Now, a lot of times, the adversary, which he understands that our life is maximized when we produce fruit. John 15 talks about, Christ is the vine, we're the branches, and as long as we stay connected to him, we'll produce fruit. But if we separate ourselves from him, apart from him, we can do nothing. It says if you separate yourselves from him, then you're like a branch, you're not producing fruit, and, during that harvest time, that branch is burned in fire because it's not producing any fruit. But it says if we stay connected to him, we'll produce fruit. But it says when you produce that fruit is purged so you can produce much fruit. So the goal is for us to continuously produce fruit. And I think Wednesday night we were just talking about how if we could just understand or wrap our mind around the value of reproduction, like if we really understood the value of that, because a lot of times we produce things and then we like stop right there, or like or how could I say it? Like I'll use we'll stop with success. But we won't obtain that success, maintain that success, and reproduce that success in our lives and in other people's lives. So we're just so happy to get to that one plateau, we'll just rest there. And then we shift from production to consumption. And then we just start consuming. But we're supposed to be producing and reproducing. Why did Eve receive the punishment of labor? Remember we were talking about labor, from labor to favor, laboring in childbirth. Out of all the things God could have came up with, because of the value of reproduction, lives come through you. Great people come through you to do great things. So the adversary wants to stop that production. He wants to pervert that production. He wants you to despise that production. All right, and then man was his punishment was he would have to struggle to produce from the ground, harvest, to struggle to produce a harvest. And if you notice, we've been struggling to produce purpose and everything in our lives, right? So Jesus paid the price so we wouldn't have to go through that, so we can be back on that road to reproduction, constantly producing. That's how everything, like God just planted the seed of man. And then, but in his system, the scripture says, as long as the earth remains, there'll always be seed time and harvest. Seed time and harvest. Genesis 8:22. So God, he planted seed into his system of seed time. There's a period of time that goes by, and there'll always be a harvest, a production. Something will be produced out of that. But if you notice, in God's original system, before they started to tamper with fruit and create sterile fruit, which we call seedless, I know that's sterile fruit, right? Like, you ain't getting the same nutrients out of that as you do fruit with seeds in it. You already knew that. All right, so before that, the system was what? You produce fruit, or you produce the harvest, and the harvest has seed in it, right? To do what? To be planted to keep that production going. So God did that. He produced man with a purpose. and with power and authority. He sowed that seed in the earth realm, and his goal was for that to keep reproducing. He said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Genesis 1, 26, 27, 28. All right, so he says, and let's give him dominion. And so he could be fruitful and multiply. So that's the seed God planted. So God's intent is for that seed to keep on going. His intent was for us to live in his image and his likeness, right? For us to be fruitful and multiply. For us to have dominion, power, and authority, not to be trampled over by the enemy, but for us to rule and reign in this life. All right, so that's his intent. But when the adversary came up with a trick called hurt and pain. And see, so once people experience hurt and pain, what do? They put up a force field, so that disconnects you from what? Okay, the purpose of putting up the force field so I don't get hurt, right? But it also blocks out help, right? So nothing else can get in, but nothing else is also getting out. So now you're limited to what you were exposed to before you put that force field up. Whatever level of wisdom, whatever level of intellect, whatever understanding, and whatever fruit you produced at that point. Because it has no access to the resources for reproduction. See, so when you go into your show, we were talking about this in counseling, the counseling training this morning, we were talking about that the life is set up where something impacts you, but it impresses you. But if it's impressing you so you can express it. If you express what's impressed you, then you won't get depressed. But if you don't express what's impressed you, you'll be subject to depress. You'll store stuff, and we're not designed to store stuff. We're designed to get things out, to express things out. We're supposed to be rivers. Stuff comes in, stuff flows out. We're not supposed to be dead seas. That's why they call it the Dead Sea. Stuff goes in and it dies because there's no life going through. Life going through. That's what our design is supposed to be. Our life is supposed to be about life, about liberty, about expression, about freedom. But see, God set it up where he put us around people. We talked about it last week. He says, esteem others better than yourself. So I'm going to give you a system for you to continue to produce this fruit. Make sure you're offering your everything in you for somebody else. So if you're taking everything in you and making sure other people get, what happens is the person that has what you need is offering it to you. But if you hold back that which you have for somebody else to partake of, somebody's holding back your stuff. Because you reap what you sow, right? So if everything in me I'm generously given, because freely it's been given, freely I should give. That's why the scripture says that. So if everything in me is not about hoarding or for my own nourishment, everything in me is for someone else to be nourished. And so that means I have to trust God's system that somebody else has everything in them that's going to nourish me. So I'm going to release what I have for everybody else because I want to make sure I get what I need. See, as that tree produces fruit, it places a demand on the root to grab more resources to fill it back up. But if that tree does not produce fruit, or if it doesn't, no one plucks that fruit from it, there's no more demand on the resources. It's a system set up perfect. You release, you receive. You hold back, you reject. See, so that's why life has to be. So do you see, the scripture says your life was not your own, you've been bought with a price. All things work together for good. So you honestly think that everybody you encounter, everybody you meet, and when you met them, it was a coincidence. It just happened to happen that way. No, it did not. The scripture says in 1 Corinthians 12:18, God set the members in the body as it pleases him. So it's not by chance that I moved to Columbus, Ohio and met my wife. And the interesting thing is when we talked about it later, I had forgot, I was in Newark, New Jersey, so just to be honest with you, Ohio wasn't never a consideration. I wasn't all into the map anyway, but I liked the Cincinnati Bengals. I was a shortstop in high school, so I liked Dave Concepcion. He was a great shortstop. Golden Glove. What is it? What's not Golden Glove? What is it? Is it? Is it Gold Glove? Okay, well, he was good. All right, so, but I never put Cincinnati in Ohio. It was like Cincinnati was his own state. Cleveland was his own state until I moved there. Like, I was never thinking, because I'm not really caring about Ohio at all. So we get to Ohio, and so years go by, and I was like, I said, so we were talking about relationships. So I was in a relationship, of course, in college. That I was going to invite the young lady to my wedding. I'm not going to get into the story. She never came. Called her back. It's like, I don't think that'd be a good idea. But as we talked about it, I never was supposed to go to that school. I met my parents, but I was staying with foster parents. So they came up to me and said, well, the state won't be paying for you to stay with us no more. See if you go live with your dad. So I was like, dog, it's like that? It was just about the money? So I kind of panicked. So I was walking down the street. I said, man, they don't want me here. My dad and them, I don't want to stay with them. I said, I'm going to be in the street. So I looked up at the sky and said, God, you got to get me in college. Now, I looked up to the sky and said, God, you got to get into college. So that was, I guess, as much spiritual as I can muster. But the next thing I said was, first school accept me, that's where I'm going. I didn't ask God nothing. Because I was like, so I had an interview at a college in East Orange, New Jersey, Upstate College. So they accepted me. Now, I didn't know because of my math scores and all that, any school I'd have went to would have accepted me. But I was making my own decision. So I figured it was like a chance that somebody would reject me. So I was like, if they accepted me, I'm going. I could have went to any school I wanted to. And I could have went to like Rutgers and wouldn't have owed nothing. I go to Upstate College, I owed them every year. But my point is, on my list of schools that I was sending out information to, my first school that I wanted to go to was OU, Ohio University. I never wanted to go to Ohio University because I thought it was in Ohio. I wasn't even thinking Ohio University is in Ohio. I'm just thinking OU, that's where I want to go. So I would have been in Ohio out of high school. So I moved to Ohio. I just got to give you this just to show you how God orchestrates all of us together. I moved to Ohio, so my sister's a part of a Baptist church. When I moved to Ohio, I wasn't going to no church. So I go to the church, I'm at the church, and I remember sitting in the balcony one day, and the choir was singing. So I couldn't see the choir. I was just, the person that was leading in song, I could see them leading in song, and I was like, I just was like mesmerized. But then after that day, I just paid it no mind. So time goes by, I go to another church, the church split. So the young people went to another church. So I go visit my friends, and that's where I met my wife. So as we start talking, she was like, oh yeah, I was at the other church. I was like, how come I didn't see you? She's like, how come I didn't see you? So it's almost like we're at the church, and let's say this is her behind me. So when I went this way, she went that way. And then when I went this way, she went that way. We're at the same church at the same time and didn't meet each other. But she was you still married? Or you was? She was still married. It's kind of like, the cowboys have to click. So she was still married at the time. But actually, when we talked about it, she was the person singing that day. But I never put two and two together. Because I was like, hey, there's this one song y'all sang, and she led the song. So she was the person. And so we go to the other church, we're praying at the altar. Well, I go to the other church, I come to the altar, I'm praying at the altar. I wasn't even supposed to be at that church, I was just dropping off a car. And as we was praying, so I guess it was this way because the balcony was this way. And I was in the aisle like where Janae is right now. And so so start praying, I put my head down, a shock went through my arm. I was like, what in the world? And I looked, I saw the back of a young lady's head. So not being all spiritual, when I was like, I hope he hurry up and get this prayer over with so I can see who that was. So I was single, so that's how I was thinking. So I see my wife, and I was like, oh, she look good too. So she goes to sit down. Now I'm across the aisle, but the aisle was a little bigger. I'm across the aisle, so I'm looking, but if she looked, then I kind of played off like I really wasn't looking. Right, so then I'm like, what do you say to a person in church?